If someone said a phrase to you like the best luxury car in the world, it would conjure images of Rolls-Royce, Bentley, perhaps even Mercedes. If someone said to you the best SUV in the world, Range Rover is likely going to be on the top of the list. And that's the vehicle we're taking a look at today, the full-on Range Rover. This is a 2016 Land Rover Range Rover HSE. This particular model is the new diesel model. Those of you watching from Europe are probably scratching your head now because, of course, the Range Rover has been available with the diesel engine for some time. It just hasn't been sold in the United States with that particular engine. And at this time, we still don't get the powerful V8 turbo diesel that Range Rover has been known for. In the United States, we just get the small one, the brand new 3-liter 6-cylinder turbo diesel. The Range Rover is instantly recognizable from the front. This was last redesigned in 2012 as a brand new 2013 model, and that's when basically everything changed. So for 2016, this is basically just a tweak of that 2013 model year vehicle. The big change in 2013, of course, is that the Range Rover went all aluminum, and in some ways it shares a few design components with the Jaguar XJ luxury sedan. Because of the general age of this particular vehicle, we have xenon headlamps up front. LED headlamps are not available. We do have very well integrated front parking sensors, and there is also an available self-parking system. In America, we tend to think that all European vehicles are small and practical, but small is not a word you can use to describe the Range Rover. This particular model is 196.8 inches long, which is already one of the larger SUVs available in America. And if you get the long wheelbase version, it stretches out to nearly 205 inches. This in long wheelbase form is actually longer than a GMC Yukon. The Range Rover isn't just long, it's also fairly wide. That's very obvious in the front seats where we have a wide center console between the driver and the front passenger, and we have an incredible amount of ground clearance, up to 11.63 inches of ground clearance with the standard air suspension. The rear end styling is elegant and restrained. We have LED tail lamp modules right here and a fairly vertical and practical hatch. But it's also dictated by the off-road mission of the Range Rover. We have a cutout section right here that's removable, so you can reveal the tow hitch, well-integrated parking sensors, and you'll notice the exhaust tips are tucked up under the rear bumper. That's to improve the departure angles on this vehicle, because you don't want them snagging on anything as you're either backing up or going out of a deep ravine. A nice touch that we really don't see much anymore is that we have a hatch right here, and then we have a tailgate that drops down right like that. That means that you have somewhere to sit if you find yourself out there camping, but it also makes loading cargo just a little bit easier because you're not going to scratch your bumper on it. Also interesting, this tailgate is powered. I think that's a feature I'd like to see in some pickup trucks. Before we go too much further, I should mention that the Range Rover really stands alone. There's no direct competitor to this vehicle in my mind, because this slots between something like a Toyota Land Cruiser or a Lexus LX 570 and something like the unpronounceable brand new Bentley SUV. With the base V6 engine under the hood, this starts just around $85,000. The model we'll be taking a look at today is right around $108,000. But this really is where the Range Rover just begins, because this is not the long wheelbase version, this is not the high-end autobiography version, this is not the version with the snazzy seats, this is not the version with the supercharged V8 engine under the hood either. If you want any of those options, then you really are well into the six figures. But the Range Rover isn't just about luxury, because if it was, then a direct competitor could be seen in something like the Mercedes-Benz GLS. But the GLS really isn't off-road capable in the same way that the Range Rover is. Over on the BMW side, we have the BMW X5. It's considerably less expensive than this. It feels less expensive inside and out. It's not off-road capable. It's just not the same sort of machine. Some of you may be asking, what about the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon? This may offend some people, but you really ought to think of the G-Wagon as the ultra-luxury Jeep Wrangler. And this would in some ways be the ultra-luxury Jeep Grand Cherokee, if you want to put it in Jeep terms. The G-Wagon is generally considered to be more off-road capable, but there are a number of compromises in order to give it the off-road ability that we don't see in the Range Rover. This is uncompromised luxury with a go-anywhere mission. As you'd expect from a luxury car, there are a variety of different engines available under this hood, including an absolutely insane supercharged V8 engine. Rather unfortunately, however, the turbo diesel V8 engine is not available in the United States. Things start out with a 3-liter supercharged V6 engine that we also see doing duty in certain Jaguar models. That produces 340 horsepower, gets about 19 miles per gallon combined. When you take a look at the fuel economy numbers, keep in mind that the competition generally starts out their SUVs as two-wheel drive models, and you have to option up into the four-wheel drive system. That's not going on in the Range Rover. It is standard. Then we have the engine that we're taking a look at right here. It is the new 3-liter turbo diesel V6 engine. It produces 254 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque. This is easily the most fuel efficient in the lineup. It averages 25 miles per gallon combined. Then we get a 3-liter supercharged V6 engine with a slightly different tweak that produces 380 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. Then we get a 5-liter V8 supercharged engine in two different tunes, one good for 510 horsepower and the other for 550. Those will get you the lowest fuel economy at a combined 15 miles per gallon. Land Rover frequently brags about their water fording ability, and rightly so, and this is one of the reasons why. This is the air intake for the engine right here behind the front of the vehicle. You notice that a lot of vehicles, they locate it right here up front where it's likely to get water inside. This is located much higher and out of the way, not likely to get splashed in. It actually integrates with the hood right here to help give you a little bit more room for the water to get out of that airstream before it gets in the engine. This is also where we find our diesel exhaust fluid reservoir. If you're looking for a luxury tow vehicle, fear not, the Range Rover will tow 7,716 pounds when properly equipped, which is more than enough for a pony or two or your favorite Airstream. As you'd expect in a luxury vehicle, the front seats are very comfortable. However, I am going to have to give these 8 out of 10 points because if you do compare the Range Rover to something like the Mercedes-Benz GLS especially, these seats are a little bit less comfortable for my body type. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support and inflatable side bolsters, but we don't have some of the other features that we find in the competition seats. You can't adjust the curvature of the back. We don't have an extending thigh cushion. We do, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion. It's linked to the 3-position driver's seat memory. Makes it a lot easier for shorter or taller drivers to find an ideal driving position. The passenger seat also has a 3-position memory in our particular model, and if you get upper end trims of the Range Rover, even the rear seats are powered. Because we are in the HSE trim, we don't have those power seats I mentioned in the rear. However, these seats do recline just a hair. This is the most upright position, and this is the most reclined position. I have a generous amount of legroom, about 4.5 inches or so between me and the front seat, with the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. If you get the long wheelbase version, then we get nearly 8 inches more rear legroom. That's sort of limo-like legroom. Moving over to the middle seat, it's very obvious that the Range Rover is a wide vehicle. You can very easily put 3 adults across the back. Center console is quite large up front. If I move all the way over to the right side, I still have about 2 inches of legroom left, even though the front seat is all the way back in its tracks. The center seat back folds down to act as an armrest and a cup holder. So we have 2 large cup holders right there and a small storage cubby right there behind. The rear seat backs fold in a 60-40 folding fashion, but they don't fold flat with the cargo area because the seat bottom cushion doesn't move at all. It stays in place. This just flops down right on top of it. The Range Rover is not about carrying large numbers of passengers, so we don't have a third row back here. In fact, you can actually get a 4-passenger version of this vehicle. The extended wheelbase version of this is not about carrying cargo either. It's not like a Chevy Tahoe to a Chevy Suburban transformation where we get an increase in the cargo capacity in the back. That long wheelbase model really is all about the back passengers, not about the back passengers' suitcases. The luxury car attention to detail is interesting back here in the trunk because even this tailgate that folds down is actually carpet covered, not plastic like we see in other vehicles. Because the Range Rover obviously has an off-road mission, we actually find a full-size spare tire under the cargo area load floor. That's getting rarer and rarer these days. Thanks to the cargo area's very square profile, we were able to fit a surprising 7 of these 24-inch hard-sided roller bags in the back. You'll notice that they do have to be arranged a little bit interestingly, but you can fit all 7 of them in the vehicle. There are 4 right across the back behind the rear seats. I did have to remove the hard cargo cover from the vehicle in order to make this work, but the lid will definitely close. Thanks to the size of this cargo area, the full-size spare tire under the cargo area load floor, an available 12-volt power port right there, and this split folding hatchback and tailgate, I'm going to give this 10 out of 10 points in my exclusive trunk comfort index. The model that we're taking a look at has this large panoramic moonroof that ends just about the rear passengers' heads. As I said earlier, the rear seats are available in a powered fashion, but our model does have the manual rear seat backs. In our trim, we have height adjustable seat belts for the driver and the front passenger, and we have 4-way adjustable headrests. They tilt forward and backward like that, and then they manually go up and down. Land Rover continues to use their very iconic armrest for the front seats. If we twiddle this little knob right here, this is how you adjust it. So we're going to turn it all the way in that direction, and you'll notice that it is now stopping in a higher position. That's in addition to the center console. The front doors are composed mostly of soft-touched stitched trim, but we do have some soft-touch injection molded plastics lower in the door, and behind this wood panel we find an additional storage cubby. We find more stitched material on the dashboard with a stitched upper and soft-touched middle and lower sections of the dashboard. We also find two glove compartments. We have an upper glove compartment right here that's more of a slot that closes almost automatically, and then we have a lower bin-style glove compartment that I was able to fit a tablet computer inside. In the center of the dashboard, we have a center channel speaker above this stitched section right here, two large air vents with knobs to close them, start-stop button, and then of course the standard infotainment and navigation system. A nice touch is that navigation is standard in all Range Rover models sold in the US. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, there is a separate video on my channel of the Jaguar version of the system. They're very much the same. You'll find the main difference between the Jaguar and the Range Rover versions of this software in the 4x4 infotainment screen. We have the status of our locking center differential. If we had a locking rear differential, it would show us that as well. Over here we see the suspension articulation. Then we can get more information on the terrain response selector. Right now we're in auto. We can change it to various different modes. Below the infotainment screen, we find a single slot optical disc player and the controls for the climate control system. Our model has the 4-zone climate control system, so we have knobs up front, and if we hit the climate button, you can actually use this system to control the rear climate control as well. We can set it to auto mode, we can have it lock the rear panel if you don't want those rear passengers to be piddling with your system, and you can of course sync all the zones with the front. This button is one that you don't find in very many vehicles. This is for the heated windscreen. This is not a defogger, that's actually right up there that uses the blower in the vehicle. This is actually a heated windscreen, very much like we see heated rear windows in cars. There's a little metal grid in the windscreen that actually heats that glass up to defrost it faster. Continuing down the dashboard, we have a rotary selector for the transmission, drive, and sport mode there as well. Park is all the way over to the left, or you can actually just keep your foot on the brake, turn off the vehicle, and it will automatically park. This button rises up out of the dashboard when you turn the car on and descends when you turn it off. To the right of that, we have a 12-volt power port right there, two very large cup holders. These actually have liners that are removable, so we can put even larger drinks inside, and then a wood cover can slide over them to hide them away. No Range Rover would be complete without a traction management knob. You'll find that right here on the left side of those cup holders. This is the general mode. We have a mode for grass, gravel, and snow. Then we have a mud rut mode, a sand mode, and then lastly a rock crawl mode. You'll find auto by pushing that button right down in there. We have a hill descent control button right over here, and then we have a low ratio button to the right of that. This engages the 2-speed transfer case. You'll notice that these buttons are a lot easier to understand than what we see in the Lexus LX 570. Below the terrain management buttons, we find a button to enable and disable the traction and stability control system. This button here is all-terrain progress control, which you can sort of think of as cruise control for off-roading. We enable this mode, and then using the set up and down buttons on the steering wheel, you can adjust your speed between approximately 1 mile per hour and 20 miles per hour, and it will control your speed up hills, down hills, across rocks, through the mud, etc. This is how we change the ride height. We have a high setting, we have a normal setting, and then we have a low setting to help you get out of the vehicle. Then we have a lock mode to keep the vehicle at that particular ride height if you're going to try and service the vehicle. The ASL is an automatic speed limiter. You can think of this sort of as a governor on the vehicle to keep you from exceeding a particular speed. Of course, if you floor the vehicle, it will still exceed that predetermined speed. This is not cruise control, but it's somewhat similar. Lastly, we have the button to enable and disable the auto start-stop system on the diesel engine that we're driving. Between the front seats, we have a large, softly padded center console because of how wide the Range Rover is. If we open this up, we find two USB inputs, an additional 12-volt power outlet right there, a auxiliary input, that's a stereo mini jack, and then small storage divider, and then a deeper storage well where you can put things like wallets, smartphones, that sort of thing. Land Rover was one of the first companies to use a full LCD instrument cluster in their vehicles, and as such, this display is not quite as configurable as we see in some of the newer systems on the market. You'll notice that on the right side, the speedometer has that yellow hatched portion. That's because we have that all-terrain progress control enabled. If we turn that off, you'll see that disappear from the screen. We also have status for our speed limiter, our ride height on this same screen right here, and messages in the center. The center of the LCD gives us our clock, our temperature outside, infotainment information. We can also adjust certain vehicle settings, instrument settings, heads-up display settings, etc. right inside this display. Below that display is where we find the trip computer. So we have trip A, trip B, average fuel economy, etc. right down there at the very bottom of the display. The steering wheel is a round 4-spoke design, no sport grips on the top or the bottom of the steering wheel, but we do have paddle shifters on the back, down on the left, up on the right side. This button module controls that multifunction LCD in the center. Menu OK, track forward, backward, volume up, down, or left, right, and up, down, depending on where you are in that display. We have a mode button for our infotainment system, a phone button, and a voice command button. On the right side of the steering wheel, we don't have radar adaptive cruise control in this model, so we just have set, up, down, resume, cancel, and then a heated steering wheel button. In terms of acceleration, the Range Rover ranges between 7.3 seconds in this diesel version, this is the slowest version of the Range Rover, to just about 5 seconds with the V8 version. The Range Rover weighs about 5,000 pounds, even though this is made out of aluminum. Aluminum is undoubtedly lighter than steel, however, you have to put a lot of aluminum in a vehicle like this to make it rigid enough for off-road duty. The most surprising thing about the acceleration score is that the gasoline supercharged V6 engine is only about 0.3 of a second faster in its base form. If you get the 380 horsepower trim of that engine, then it's almost as fast as a Lexus LX 570. The Lexus SUV is probably the closest direct competitor to this Range Rover right here, and it runs from 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds. That slots it very firmly between the supercharged V8 version of the Range Rover and the V6 version of the Range Rover. This engine is definitely not your grandfather's diesel engine. You can certainly tell that there's a diesel under the hood, but this engine is very civilized. It's smooth, it's quiet, and the acceleration is very, very good thanks to the 8-speed automatic transmission. The ZF 8-speed automatic was certainly designed with diesel engines in mind, and that's very important since this engine, like most diesels, redlines right around 4,000 RPM. The HSE trim that we've been driving stopped from 60 to 0 in 128 feet. That's fairly impressive for a 5,000-pound SUV, but you will find shorter stopping distances in some of the performance on-road SUVs, something like a BMW X5. It will definitely go from 60 to 0 shorter, especially if you get the summer tires and the wider tires that you can get on the BMW. However, the BMW is not the same sort of thing as this because it's not as off-road capable by a long stretch. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this a B. The Range Rover is fairly impressive for a large SUV like this, but it is still an off-road oriented vehicle. And that's important because the mission of the Range Rover is not to carve corners as fast as a BMW X5. The mission is to go places where you can't take a BMW X5 or a Mercedes-Benz GLE or GLS. As a result, the model that we're driving has 255 width tires. They are relatively high aspect ratio tires for a modern luxury vehicle, and we also again have that full four-corner air suspension. Air suspensions tend to make the vehicle feel a little bit more isolated from the road. They tend to give the vehicle a little bit of a floaty, boaty feeling. If you're wondering what kind of an impact an air suspension has on general vehicle dynamics, then I suggest you go over to the Mercedes dealer and drive a Mercedes-Benz C-Class with and without the air suspension. Not that you're shopping for a Mercedes-Benz C-Class if you're looking at the Range Rover, of course, it's just that the Mercedes C-Class has a regular steel spring suspension and an available air suspension. It's an excellent vehicle where you can actually drive the two back to back and compare and contrast. Corner carving may not necessarily be the Range Rover's forte, but an excellently polished ride certainly is, and this gets an A+. Even out here on this winding, bumpy road, this vehicle never loses its composure. A quiet cabin is another hallmark of a Range Rover, and this vehicle does not disappoint. We scored 69 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this cabin, making this one of the quietest SUVs we've ever tested. Those of you that are paying attention will notice that the BMW X5 was half a decibel quieter, but that's not really a very big difference, so we still get an A+ in this section. Fuel economy with this diesel engine is absolutely excellent, but if you get the supercharged V8 engine, then fuel economy leaves a little bit to be desired. You'll definitely be solidly down there in the teens if you get the V8. If you get the V6, you'll be in the high teens, but if you get this diesel V6, you'll actually be right around 26 to 27 miles per gallon, depending on where you're driving the vehicle. Again, I drive on roads like this winding mountain road that we're on right now. I go up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day, and I've still been averaging 26 miles per gallon. Even though diesel is more expensive than premium gasoline out here in California, and this diesel engine is a little bit more expensive to buy than the base gasoline engine in the Range Rover, you'll still save money for the average driving cycle on a yearly basis. It won't really take you more than about 18 months or so to pay off the extra cost of this diesel engine. It's one thing that I would strongly recommend getting in the Range Rover if you're not looking at the absolute performance versions. So if you don't need that supercharged V8, if you don't need 500 or 550 horsepower, then get the diesel engine. This is an excellent buy. This diesel engine gets approximately 60% better fuel economy than the base gasoline V6 engine in the Range Rover. And really the only drawback is that 0.3 of a second different 0 to 60 time. That's a very, very small number. In fact, that number is so small that I suspect this engine produces more power than Land Rover says that it does. If you take a look at the Jeep Grand Cherokee turbo diesel, produces very similar horsepower figures to this vehicle, very similar torque numbers. It's also just about the same curb weight. It is markedly slower 0 to 60, even though it's using essentially the same 8-speed automatic transmission. Explaining the off-road appeal of the Range Rover is a little bit tricky. It's sort of like explaining the appeal of a supercar. Supercars are made to go really fast, and people will say, yeah, but you can't drive your supercar that fast on the road. You might say, well, I have access to a track now, and then I'll drive my supercar on a track. In a way, this is the same sort of thing with perhaps a little bit of a twist. Someone might say, well, why would you take your $120,000, $140,000, $150,000 SUV off-roading? Some people might say it's nice to know that it could do it if I wanted to, and some people might say, heck, I'm going to take my $100,000 SUV to the off-road park and have fun on a weekend. It's exactly the same sort of thing. Some of you might rightly think that any Range Rover owner that takes their SUV to an off-road course and gets it all scratched up should have it taken away. But whatever you think of that, that's something that you can do in the Range Rover that you just can't do in an Audi Q7, you couldn't do in a Volvo XC90 or a BMW X5, or even a Mercedes-Benz GLS. The one vehicle on sale in America that could compete with some versions of the Range Rover is the Lexus LX 570. The LX 570 is just about the same price as lower-end, comparably equipped trims of the Range Rover. It's just about as off-road capable, it's just about as nice on the inside, real wood trim, semi-aniline leather, etc. The LX 570, of course, uses a naturally aspirated V8 engine. This uses supercharged V6 engines, but performance is actually going to be quite similar. This is all made out of aluminum. The Land Cruiser, on the other hand, is all steel, and it's a little bit heavier, so it takes actually a little bit more power to get the Lexus moving than it does the Range Rover. The lightweight construction of the Range Rover actually pays dividends off-road because a lighter vehicle is less likely to get stuck in certain sticky situations. The Lexus is likely going to be a little bit less expensive to own, operate, and repair. It's likely going to be a little bit more reliable as well. However, when you start taking a look up the Range Rover food chain, there's simply no Lexus that can compare. There's no long wheelbase Lexus, there's no supercharged V8 Lexus that produces 550 horsepower, there's no Lexus with the same kind of luxury content that we get, especially in the top-end trims of the Range Rover. On the flip side of things, this is going to be significantly less expensive to purchase, own, operate, insure, etc. than the unpronounceable brand new Bentley SUV. Of course, the Bentley is insanely fast, has a very powerful engine under the hood. We have more luxury gadgets and gizmos than the Range Rover could even think about on the inside, but you're going to pay significantly more for your Bentley SUV than you would a Range Rover. In fact, you could get a Range Rover for the week and then a different Range Rover for the weekend for about the same price as that Bentley SUV. For people that are not familiar with the Land Rover or Mercedes lineup, perhaps a Jeep parallel is the best way to explain this, as I said earlier. You can think of the G-Wagon as sort of the ultra-luxury Jeep Wrangler. This would be the ultra-luxury Jeep Grand Cherokee. It's just a different mission. This has a more passenger-focused mission, still off-road capable, of course, but a more passenger-focused mission on the inside. The G-Wagon seems to be a little bit more hardcore off-road to the detriment of some of the luxury trappings on the inside. Some of you on Facebook asked me to comment about the brand new Jaguar F-Pace and how it compares to the Range Rover. This is a little bit tricky because, of course, Jaguar Land Rover is one company, and the long-running joke has always been Jaguar does make SUVs. They're called Range Rovers. Jaguar decided, perhaps rightly so, that it was a little bit difficult to continue competing in the modern luxury market without an SUV or a crossover that was Jaguar branded. So you can think of the Jaguar F-Pace as the crossover in the Jaguar Land Rover lineup. This is the full-on SUV in the Jaguar Land Rover lineup. So if you want to actually go off-roading in a Jaguar Land Rover vehicle, it would be the Range Rover. If you are more concerned about gravel roads, snow, you don't really want to go off-road, you don't need to go off-road, then the Jaguar F-Pace may be a little bit more appropriate. The F-Pace is going to be the sportier entry, it's going to handle a little bit better, feel a little bit better out on the road. The Range Rover is going to be the more capable vehicle, however. If you have around $100,000 burning a hole in your pocket and you're looking for one of the best SUVs made, look no further than the Range Rover. I have, of course, owned a few Jaguar models in the past, so perhaps I am a little bit biased to the brand, but the diesel version of the Range Rover especially is just one of the best vehicles in this segment. The fuel economy has been excellent. We've been getting about 26 miles per gallon, which definitely helps pay for the diesel upgrade versus the gasoline engine. The fuel economy bump is pretty significant, from around 18 miles per gallon in real-world driving with the base V6 engine to over the EPA's average rating in this particular vehicle even though I go up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day. In addition to the excellent fuel economy, we have an interior that's assembled with a greater level of precision than you see in most of the luxury companies. It's really obvious, especially when we start taking a look at the rear passenger area. We get more soft touch materials, more stitched leather, more stitched pleather, and more soft plastic than we see in any of the luxury competition. Thanks to the lightweight aluminum construction and the standard air suspension, this vehicle also has a very pleasing blend of handling ability and a very soft ride. And lastly, of course, it is significantly less expensive than the Bentley. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. Be sure and check out those related videos over there on the side of your screen, and I'll see you next week.